Well, finally, what about globalization? As modern liberal and capitalist democracy becomes ever more powerful and ever more common around the world, some activists in both the Western world and the underdeveloped world claim that its aggressive and rapid spread around the world, called globalization, harms both worlds by letting giant multinational corporations profit generously while doing little or nothing about poverty in the underdeveloped world. Instead, they claim globalization results in frivolous and environmentally harmful wealth in the Western world. This charge, say most economists and scientists who have studied poverty and wealth, is simply false. Globalization does lead to change, as capitalism always has. These scientists point to statistics that show enormous overall gains, however, in countries like India, China, Korea, Taiwan, Malaysia, and South Africa. Many of these countries were written off as hopeless just a few decades ago. And despite claims to the contrary, there have also been solid gains in income, agriculture, health, life expectancy, pollution control, and almost every other measure of progress in countries that were formerly communist in Eastern Europe, as well as in countries in South America, Central America, Africa, and Southeast Asia. Some countries, it is true, seem to have been left out of this progress so far. Many of these are Muslim, oil-rich, but industrial, ideologically poor countries in the Middle East, misleadingly rich like feudal Spain and Portugal were with their gold and silver, but handicapped by religious and ethnic differences inherited from 1,000 years ago. Some of the countries in sub-Saharan Africa are also slow to progress, handicapped by corrupt governments and endemic health and environmental problems. And finally, the few still communist countries like Cuba and North Korea, handicapped by a perverse and tyrannical economic and political system. If capitalism is rapidly expanding its reach around the world, what about freedom and democracy? And is there a natural partnership between free market capitalism and liberal democracy? Well, here is a map of the world in 1800, at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution and the beginnings of modern capitalism. Countries in red were relatively free, democratic, and capitalist. All other countries in the world were authoritarian feudal states, or they were still in hunter-gathering tribal societies. Well, here is the same map in 1900. Note that capitalist and democratic countries are significantly more common. And here is the same map in the 21st century. Capitalism and democracy are not only more common, they are the norm. Worthy of note is that many smaller countries in Asia and Africa are capitalist, but they're not democratic. And the same is true of China and Russia. Of special note, there are no countries that are free and democratic, but not capitalist. Scandinavian countries like Sweden, Norway, Finland, and Denmark are sometimes listed as exceptions because of their strong commitment to social welfare policies. However, their basic economy is firmly capitalist, as most of the productive sphere that creates and underlies their wealth is privately owned. Some today would claim that Venezuela is an exception as well. While still relatively free and democratic, under the leadership of Hugo Chavez, it seems to be moving rapidly in the direction of communism, and in the process restricting important freedoms like freedom of the press, abrogation of private contracts, and severe restrictions on private property. Chavez has openly boasted of his admiration and desire to follow in the footsteps of Fidel Castro's Cuba. Considering Cuba's lack of freedom and abundance of poverty, if Chavez carries through on his plans, it may well be a dark day for his country. In conclusion, we can answer the question posed at the beginning of this program with some confidence. Yes, capitalism is necessary for democracy, but it is not sufficient. A healthy regard for self-interest, for private property, and for free trade, in other words, combined with a commitment to science and technology, and leavened by a commitment to humanistic religious values, seems to be the story of past economic success as well as human prosperity and freedom. It may or may not be the end of history, but it does seem to be the wave of the future.